Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of TalkNL. My name is Graydon Pelley, you know that for sure. I'm joined this evening, of course, by my regular sidekick, Mr. Rudy Norman, who's going to chime in a little bit. He's having a little bit of technical difficulty. Oh, there he is, Rudy Norman, all the way from Burlington on the Great Northern Peninsula. How you doing, Rudy?
I'm doing pretty good, Graydon. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, thanks. Looking forward to another exciting show. And we want to remind everybody that we are on Facebook Live, we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and you can join us at any one of these mediums, and you can certainly enjoy. And don't forget, if you got a comment that you want to make, please leave it in the comment section, and hopefully we'll get to most of them throughout the show. We are excited this evening to have another special guest with us on TalkNL. We want to welcome Dr. Laura Lee Oates. Some of you are familiar with her, but I'm just going to read a little clip here of something I've got written down. Dr. Laura Lee Oates is a consultant and instructor in the MPhil Humanities program at Memorial University. She has worked in the senior levels of both the provincial and federal government. Her research is on the 19th century British and French imperial history. She has been published in the International History Review and is preparing her first monograph for State University of New York Press. She is vice chair of Equal Voice. She is a regular contributor to CBC, the Globe and Mail, and the Hill Times. And tonight, she can add to her resume, she's a special guest on TalkNL. Welcome, Dr. Oates. So glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the first question I want to ask you, of course, is how you're doing with the pandemic. We know you're in Metro St. John's area. I think in that area, how are things going?
Well, I'm in the Ghouls, and that's where I grew up, Ghouls Rules. So it's kind of Metro St. John's area. We don't like to think of it as St. John's, but of course.
Sorry about that.
Which we were joined to the city of St. John's, gosh, decades ago now. Yeah. I live with my mom, who we lost my dad last year, and my mom is in the kind of early stages of dementia. And it's a challenging time for her in particular. Mm-hmm. She's in line to get the vaccine now. I signed her up. Nice. Because she's 75, so she qualifies. But yeah, I know all about the challenges of seniors who are trying to live through the pandemic.
So also you're part-time professor at Memorial University, and it's a different time for what you do there, of course. And I understand that you instruct mostly graduate students. So mm-hmm. How's that been?
It's a challenging time for universities everywhere. Like I think we saw Laurentian go into receivership recently. And Memorial University has lost, at last measure, it was $40 million. Wow. And that, basically, I think that's occurred under the Ball administration. But that kind of includes like capital costs and infrastructure costs that aren't being addressed. But billions have been cut from universities the last 2 decades, and that is money that's being taken away from tenured positions. It's money that's being taken away from research and development, and which research and development creates jobs, it creates companies. So the university is an important asset. Like I tell people, I'm still waiting for the news story on the economic value of the students who aren't in the city right now, because of course, like 17% of the students at Memorial are international students, and a lot of them are choosing to do instruction from home right now. And I've been an international student myself because I did my PhD in the United Kingdom, And I know that like when students come to study, they bring a lot of capital with them, right? I had a scholarship to do my PhD, but I left more money in the UK than I ever took out of it. And, you know, they rent apartments here and they buy services here and utilities, and they work jobs here. So that's, you know, the university is an important employer, an important economic contributor to the community in a way that's, you know, not always recognized.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about that a little later on in the show when we talk about the role that university would have in the province. And you touched briefly on research and development there. And I think that's somewhere that we're going to have to go as a province, you know, for the future. And we'll talk about that and what we're talking about when we look at research and development. But before we get to that, there's a whole gamut of topics that I've written down, and every day it seems like there's something new popping out of the magic hat or out of the somewhere. Something new comes up. But let's go back to just a couple of weeks ago, or we're still in the middle of it. I want to get your thoughts on the provincial election. We've heard a lot of questions about if, when, should it have happened, should have been done the way it was. We talked about elections NL, and what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that it's going to be a legitimate election?
Well, I think that is that's a question kind of best put to constitutional lawyers, and we've heard some differing opinions on that already. I mean, I think the kind of the biggest contribution I can make to that conversation is, and you know, I've studied political science, but I was never I never specialized in elections, and we have great people here in the political science department, like Amanda Bittner, Scott Matthews, who specialize in elections, and people like Kelly Bladuc, who knows the Elections Act fairly well, from what I understand. And they've been very vocal. And you know, I think the main piece that I can contribute to the conversation is kind of best practices from other jurisdictions that don't really seem to have been paid attention to here. Like we know, for example, that British Columbia, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick have had pandemic elections. And it's generally considered conventional wisdom almost at this point that if you have, if you're in a minority government that has an election during a pandemic, when you're on TV every day and you're handing out money every day, that's a good time to turn that minority government into a majority, particularly if you're seen as having managed COVID well, which up until this, for sure, until the UK variant arrived in the province, our government was considered to be doing a good job of managing the pandemic. And there's all kinds of debates that you could have about whether or not that's actually true. But basically, while our leaders seem to have learned the lesson that, yes, you can take a minority and turn it into a majority during a pandemic, and they were polling really well, leading up to kind of the implosion of the current election. But what they didn't learn was to look at the best practices on pandemic elections from other jurisdictions. So we know, for example, that British Columbia updated their Elections Act in 2019. They gave their chief electoral officer broad powers to make changes in case of emergencies. Their Elections Advisory Committee, which includes representatives from all the parties in their legislative body, came together and met at least twice. They developed a safe elections plan in consultation. Actually, they developed multiple safe election plans in consultation with public health in British Columbia. And we know, for example, that New Brunswick had drive-through voting where you could drop off your ballot. BC had phone-in voting for people who were in quarantine and couldn't come out and vote. So there was all kinds of best practices from other jurisdictions that seem to have been ignored here. And, you know, nobody even bothered to kind of look at the Elections Act and say, does this need to be updated for a pandemic election?
Mhm. So, Dr. Oates, and we'll move on from this now because there's a lot of things we want to talk about. But when I look at this election, I look at a number of elections. For example, when you're getting 55 to 60% out to vote on a regular election, and this election, it looks like it's probably going to be less than that. So if you get, say, 45% of the eligible voters to vote in an election, and then that vote is split between X number of parties, and you get a government, whether it's a minority or majority, government elected with, 20, 25% of the eligible voters. For me, and I've said this about elections for a long time, because I think we really got to get a democratic reform in motion here, but that doesn't really give any government a real strong mandate, does it?
Okay, so what we know right now is that Elections.NL has reported that we've got a maximum of 51% voter turnout in this election based on the number of ballots that were ordered. Our lowest election turnout previously was in 2019. We had 55-ish percent turnout, 55.2% turnout.
Now he's hoping that all of these ballots are coming back.
Yeah, so realistically, they're not going to. I've been predicting you'll see about a 5% drop off. And that I think translates into about 10% of the ones that have been ordered most recently. And, we can't really count on all these ballots making it back through the mail in time either. So we're headed for the lowest voter turnout in our history. And it's particularly troubling that that Bruce Chalk doesn't see it as his responsibility to make it as easy as possible for people to register to vote. And there's been a major movement in certain circles, particularly in the United States, because there's so much conversation down there about voter suppression. But 5 U.S. states now have automatic voter registration. You change your government ID, bam, you're changed on the voters registration list, and automatic mail out ballots, which by the way, the city of St. John's is doing now too, right? Everyone's registered. Yeah. Everyone gets a mail in ballot.
How, the biggest concern that I think I had when Bruce Chalk came out and said that it's really not a metric that he uses to garner success here. The fact of how many people vote, voter turnout isn't something he uses. When, to me, isn't that the sole purpose of his job, to make sure as many people vote as possible?
Yeah, I think the best response to that was Amanda Bittner on Twitter, who, again, full professor of political science, elections expert. And her response was, "You had one job."
You have one job. Yeah, I saw that. How concerning is it for you? I know you're not a law expert or constitutional expert, but just from, a person who is in the know or watches these things, how likely do you think it is that we are going to see a legal challenge for this? We're seeing people now getting the wrong ballots. We're hearing reports of people receiving other people's ballots, and they're not getting full ballots and getting the wrong districts. And, there's just story after story. So how many, what's the chances you think that people are going to challenge this legally?
Well, given that Ches Crosby is a lawyer and a fairly well-established and respected one, I'd say there's a better than average chance of that right now. But the problem that we got is the Elections Act is silent on a lot of stuff. Like, a lot of this stuff wasn't dreamed of or spelled out in the Elections Act, so there's not a whole lot there for a judge to interpret. Historically, from what I understand from lawyers, that judges will try and give the benefit of the doubt. If they think, that it's reasonable that you voted for X, they will let your ballot be counted. But there's just so much that can be challenged with this election.
Yeah, we've got a comment here already. Elmo says he knows a person who got 2 ballots. I saw a tweet today as well from someone that said the same thing. So I mean, we're just hearing so many irregularities now that are just so troubling. And apparently Bruce Chalk's biggest concern is whether or not Kara Wells got his.
Yeah, and that's kind of so like typical of this government, that like they're concerned with media personalities more than the average voter.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue into, now you and I, we follow each other on Twitter, and I comment on some of your things, you comment on some of mine. We've had conversation in the past. Let's go into democratic reform. I mean, I listen to the news. I watch what's going on every day, and I know, like you, sometimes it's so frustrating. I don't know where to turn or what to say or what to do, because nothing I can do really right now. But democratic reform, people talk about democratic reform, and everyone talks about something's got to change, something's got to give. But for me, it's not going to happen unless we make it happen. Mm-hmm. And what is it, in your opinion, Dr. Oates, what's our first step to making our elections, and what's the first step towards proper democratic reform?
Well, it's been in the Liberal platform since 2015. It was in their platform again in 2019, and nothing happened. It was assigned to the Department of Justice. And from what I understand, they were doing research on the topic, but nothing ever came of it. Then since the 2019 election, I believe it was the NDP who brought a private member's bill to the House to have a standing committee. It was a special committee on democratic reform.
All-party committee, yeah.
And they appointed their representatives, and if they met, I don't know about it. Paul Lane was appointed chair, and Alison Coffin was the vice chair. I tried to get a meeting with Paul Lane, and he said, yeah, we'll get around to that kind of thing. And Alison Coffin did offer me a meeting, but she wasn't terribly hopeful that anything was going to happen before the election.
Okay, let me share something with you, though, with regards to that, okay? So we've got an all-party committee on democratic reform. We want to change the way people are elected. We want to change the way elections are being done. We only have members from the House of Assembly who use the system to get elected and re-elected. I had a conversation some time ago with the Premier face-to-face, and I asked him, I said, Premier, when you talk about democratic reform, or when you think about things need to change, what does that mean for you? I said, we have an all-party committee that's, they're designated the job of democratic reform. And his comment to me was exactly this. I'm not really impressed with that committee. In fact, he said, I haven't even given it any thought.
And he had told me around the time that the cabinet was appointed that there was going to be someone responsible for democratic reform. But notably, the Red Book doesn't even include the word democratic. And that can only lead one to believe that they don't want to change the system. And, his whole approach to the election, you saw kind of what he was saying there before Christmas about, I didn't create the Westminster system, but he's made it pretty clear he was willing to take full advantage of the Westminster system and all, all the advantages. Like the big problem with it is executive dominance, right? It gives the Premier's office an incredible amount of power. So he's made it pretty obvious that he's willing to use that power to his advantage. And the other thing he's done is he's centralized a lot of decision making within the Premier's office with all these Premier's task forces, right? He seems to be moving things further and further away from kind of the research and the public service. He talked about creating a new public policy framework when he was running for leadership. and evidence-based decision making. None of this stuff is showing up in the Red Book. And the word evidence doesn't even show up in the Red Book. And there's been no movement towards creating research capacity. There's absolute disdain for scholars and research within this government, best I can tell. No building up the Newfoundland Statistics Agency or research capacity within the departments. And I mean, you can say all of that costs money, but you know what costs even more money than research is bad policy decisions like Muskrat Falls.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And we have seen that over and over again in this province. But I guess, and we can park here for a little bit. The thing I guess that frustrates me the most is, I mean, you've done it. You've talked to lots of people. I've traveled across this province and talked to lots of people. Yes, we got to change things. Things got to be done. Terry says here, why would they reform anything? Politicians are at the epitome of their careers with no accountability or transparency. Why would they want to change that?
Well, they have accountability, right? Like one of my political science professors, Mark Gracer, who's retired now, used to say, democracy just gives the latest dictator the opportunity to do what he wants for 4 years. So when I'm talking about democratic reform, I'm talking about putting checks and balances around that, right? Yeah. And one of the ways you can put checks and balances around the power of the Premier's office is to create research capacity, to create, public dialogue about the research, to improve consultations. And the federal government, for example, has a Ministry of Democratic Institutions. Why don't we have a secretariat with an executive council for democratic institutions? Or, you don't even have to call it democratic reform, but we should be paying attention to how our government institutions are functioning. What we call the Westminster system or parliamentary government, I mean, it dates back to the Middle Ages. It wasn't designed with working class people in mind. It wasn't designed with people of color in mind, or women, or immigrants, or disabled persons. It's rooted in kind of ancient practices, which were very elitist. It's not surprising that it's not resulting in optimal decision making for the people of this province.
And for me, it's pretty disheartening that, I mean, we have a premier that's been right now, a premier that's been groomed for years and years and years, a young doctor, very popular, well known. And you made a good point, and this is what I've noticed, that instead of becoming a part of a team that's collaborative and making evidence-based decisions and, decisions that are in the best interest of everybody, we see exactly what you described as centralizing power right back to one office, one person who's got the power over all of these decisions. And we have seen that happen over the last little while. And what a step backwards for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador to have to witness this.
And there's a lot of things that are happening now. If you really look at it, there's a lot of parallels to authoritarian leadership throughout history. Like for the focus on kind of positive thinking, and anybody who kind of doesn't fall in line or agree is being negative. That's pure dictatorial behavior. Snap elections have got, popular governments got a long history of going bad. There's an incredible focus on the leader within government right now. And, like you can kind of see that in the Red Book. You can see it in the photo ops that are happening. Like our premier is probably the only kind of first minister that I saw do a photo op for the arrival of the vaccine, or do a photo op with the frontline healthcare workers who were getting their vaccines. I didn't see that happening in other jurisdictions, right? The focus was on the frontline healthcare workers who were vaccinating and getting vaccinated. And really, they should have been allowed to like have their day with that focus being on them. There's a blending of party and government right now that's not really very healthy. Why is the Liberal Party account tweeting out the COVID numbers in Liberal red every day? I mean, that's a problem that's being addressed by the public service and public servants. It's being paid for by citizens and taxpayers. And we're seeing a lot of things like that, a lot of government things that are kind of being attached to the Liberal brand, but the Liberal Party is not doing this or paying for this. There's a lot of kind of unhealthy things that have been happening within our polity lately.
Let's not forget the Liberal bus passes that went out a few months ago as well.
Right?
It's becoming I hate to use this word, but it's becoming a pandemic in and of itself. I don't know. I guess it's a communication strategy or whatever, but it seems like people, the Liberal Party are trying to convince people that, there is no other government besides a Liberal government, and it's not a government that's doing this; it's the Liberal government that's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to jump ship a little bit, I guess. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, I guess, the Green Report, or the lack thereof. So we learned this week that the report is going to be delayed. What was your thoughts on how that was put forward and how that was communicated, and were you shocked at all?
Certainly I wasn't shocked that the report was late. The really shocking thing was how it was announced on a Saturday. Like, first it was kind of tweeted out by the political reporters on Saturday morning that there was an announcement coming at 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So that kind of gives you the feeling right off the bat that they are trying to hide it during a downtime in the news cycle when people are disengaged from the news. So that's, and I've worked in government communications for a long time. Like, that's very poor practice, like to kind of make it look like you're trying to hide it. Like, what, is there a reason this couldn't wait till Monday morning when all the newsrooms were full and all the political reporters were back at work? And that,
the premier could have been informed and briefed first.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said, or the premier could have been informed and briefed before it was put out there.
Well, there's kind of a weird thing going on there, right? With the caretaker mode. It's like they're in caretaker mode, but they're not talking to the clerk about what's going on in government, but they're doing news conferences every day and getting all this kind of free media attention for people who are on the ticket right now. They're kind of doing it backwards. It's like the deputy ministers can do the news conferences, but they should be talking to the clerk.
Yeah. It's absolutely like I'm just flabbergasted that. And what I think the thing I noticed in the most, Dr. Oates, is that all of these actions now, which we look at and say, common sense tells us this is not the way to do it, but it's so blatant now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the kind of the plan for a power grab was so blatant too. It's like, okay, we're up in the polls. So we know we can turn this into a majority. So let's go to the polls right now before the Green Report comes out and get our majority. And then we can do whatever changes we want.
Yeah. Let's, because someone's talking about it there. Let's look at the last couple of days with the Change Healthcare contract. How concerned are you with the announcement of a U.S.-based company promising millions of dollars to Newfoundland healthcare if cuts can be made? As a healthcare worker, it makes me very nervous.
Well, I don't think anything good can come out of that. What we do know is, so going back to the leadership debate, say when Premier Fury was debating John Abbott, and those are, two people who know an awful lot about healthcare in the province. And John Abbott made the point that we got 40% more nurses per capita than any other region in the country. And the current premier said, well, wait a minute now. How about all the times that we've had to cancel surgeries because we don't have a nurse to go into surgery with us, right? This is a location that depends a lot on nurses because there's lots of locations that don't have doctors. And we've got to realize a lot of this kind of public health research on, what is optimal staffing, it doesn't really apply very well here, because even though we're a province, where really our population density makes us more like a territory, particularly when you get off the Avalon. And the same thing with like the PET scanner. If I was living in Corner Brook, I wouldn't really want to travel a whole day to get tested for cancer, stay overnight, get my test, maybe stay overnight again. Or, the alternative is you have to take the cost of flying into St. John's. I know that based on what our population is, we're not supposed to have the extra testing, but maybe the humane thing is to not make people do all that traveling to get tested for cancer. So we've got to realize, like, a lot of the statistics on what our healthcare system should be like don't necessarily apply really well in a widespread aging population like we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I'm really skeptical of kind of like what this algorithm can bring to the table.
Again, we're so taken off guard with this, but every day more news comes out and we get more details of what happened and how it was brought out, and we hear that the CEOs of the health authorities signed off on this, the unions were aware of this, and so on and so forth. So, and now it was back in June or July this deal was signed. There was
apparently
a $3 million sign-up fee, and it could cost up to $35 million if we don't implement 95% of the recommendations. There could be another $5 million penalty. And we're just hearing about this in March of 2021. I mean, let's face it, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and apparently now this is on the last administration as well, what they're doing and how they're screwing around the people of this province is absolutely unimaginable.
Well, they always seem to find money for the things that they want. When citizens ask for services, that the money just isn't there. Like, the money isn't there to allow CERB / social assistance recipients to continue receiving social assistance, and then that causes all kinds of administrative problems. But there's money there for tax cuts, for construction programs. There's just utter and complete disdain within the system for working class people and people who are living in poverty. It's like nobody ever asks how much it costs when it's money for big oil, but God forbid you should ask for something for citizens.
Yeah. And there's a couple of more topics. Time is flying, I'm telling you. There's a couple of more topics. I know you and I have talked about this a couple of times, and I've watched your tweets and your social media posts. Let's talk for a minute about, as you mentioned, about there's no money for the citizens of Newfoundland and Labrador. With that in mind, we've heard a lot lately about the $15 minimum wage and how it would benefit our province. And we've heard arguments on both sides of that. You and I have had conversations about this. So what do you see happening with the $15 minimum wage?
Well, it's kind of ridiculous that neither one of the mainstream parties is willing to run on paying our citizens a living wage, and we got to realize that what they're doing is enabling these companies that come in here, like Walmart and Loblaw slash Dominion. Um, all these kind of multinationals or national companies, we're allowing them to come in here and keep our people in poverty and do things like move them off full-time employment and not pay them benefits.
Yeah.
That's kind of a legacy of globalization that low and middle income earner citizens haven't had a raise since 1970, and globalization has absolutely decimated the labor movement. All the research that we have, I mean, there's not two sides of this. The research only supports one side. Getting money into the hands of citizens is a good thing for growing the economy and stimulating the economy in times of crisis. I mean, we saw, Canada had the fastest growing economy in the G7, largely because Trudeau implemented a Canada Child Benefit, or increased it, sorry, and it increased benefits for seniors. I mean, getting money into the hands of working class people, it works to stimulate the economy. And, even research that's been done on the minimum wage since the pandemic shows there's no shutdowns, there's no job losses, and it brings money from out of province, from these big companies, into the province. And, those people then pay more taxes, there's more tax revenue. So, why wouldn't we do it? I mean, like President Biden has said, even right-wing economists are coming around on the idea of a $15 minimum wage because it is a path to growth, which, ironically, the Progressive Conservative Party is running on growth, but they're not running on a living wage.
Mm-hmm. So what do you say to the people that say $15 an hour wage would be fantastic if the cost of goods and services didn't rise with it, or, that we're going to have to pay for the extra cost for businesses now for product and stuff like that? So is it a benefit, or is it just one canceling out the other, or is it a true benefit to have $15 an hour, starting $15 an hour minimum wage?
And let's be clear, $15 an hour is not a living wage in this province. Right? A living wage is more like $18.86 an hour. I mean, it doesn't hold up to the research. I mean, when people have more money to spend, they go out and spend it, and you get more business, and can employ more people. So, I mean, the arguments against it, and there's a lot of research about this coming out right now because it was just such a big issue, and it's still a big issue in the United States. But one of the paths out of this pandemic and paths to economic recovery is growing the minimum wage.
Dr. Oates, I feel that one of the biggest things that we have lacked in Newfoundland and Labrador is research and development. We talk about the future, we talk about the environment, and we've heard lots of conversations. I know I've had conversations with you about the oil and gas industry and a greener economy and so on and so forth. And I think we look at, and you made reference to it earlier on about the professors we have here at Memorial University. We have, very intelligent people here, but it doesn't seem like that our government and our elected MHAs put a lot of weight behind going to these very educated people for advice and for studies and data and evidence and stuff like that, scientific evidence. What do you say about that? I mean, I believe that, we talk about the oil and gas, and I know that for a while, oil and gas is going to be a part of our economy. It's going to be there. But I believe that it's time for us to do some research in how we can develop greener energies and invest in greener companies and I think that can be a big part of a sustainable Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay, so what we know about research and development is research and development creates jobs, right? Because you develop business ideas, right? We just recently today, we had a group of nurses who developed a swab, a nasal swab for doing the COVID tests, which is now going to be commercialized and sold all over the world. So that is the path to a better future, right? And I think the company is Miso,
Yeah. Smart thermostats.
Yeah, the thermostat is the word I was looking for. So, you know, I mean, we need more companies like that, but that requires investment in research and development. And it seems like a lot of the money that goes into research and development here goes into fishery science. Or oceanography, right? We're considered a center of excellence for oceanography. But, you know, that's not the only thing we can do. And realistically, research and development, pandemic preparedness, and green energy, those are your national security issues of the future. And cybersecurity, sorry, is the other one. You know, while we're, you know, investing in military, a lot of that money needs to be taken now and redirected towards things like green energy, ensuring a healthy electricity grid, which, you know, electricity is going to get more and more important. And the reality is that when, you know, we're not like, because a lot of my critics say she wants to turn off oil. The reality is the oil companies are going to do that for us, and they're already doing it. You know, they're only interested in one thing. I mean, that they tell our leaders that you know, our oil is green. Well, there's no such thing, right? Oil is only going to last as long as people want to put it in their cars, really. And there's a big movement towards electric vehicles. But, you know, once the price per barrel is just too much, and the oil companies are just going to turn off the tap and be gone. And we've got to be ready for when that happens. And we're already seeing it happen. I mean, oil companies lost trillions last year. One of the reasons that Joe Biden can move on green energy right now and an energy transition in the United States is because oil companies lost a lot of power last year because they lost a lot of money. And as goes the United States, so goes the world. I mean, China's already promised to move on net zero by 2060. Once Russia decides to move on this, and Russia is one of our greatest competitors, really, from a Canadian oil perspective, because their product costs about the same per barrel as ours does. Once Russia moves on green energy, it's game over.
Dr. Oates, just before we clue this up, I just want to touch on one that we haven't talked about tonight. That's Muskrat Falls, the Atlantic Loop, and how we're dependent on the federal government to get us out of where we are, and what that's going to mean for us when it comes to giving up what we have to give up.
So, I mean, why is Muskrat Falls even on the table? Like we're clearly in need of federal stimulus in this province. And like there's a $1.9 trillion stimulus package going through the American Congress right now. And it includes money for getting kids back to school. It includes money for testing and vaccination sites. It includes money for state and local government, improved EI programs. What are we getting here in Newfoundland and Labrador? We're going to buy Muskrat Falls from you. Well, you already signed a loan guarantee for Muskrat Falls, and the one payment you made on it, we've got to pay back. So that doesn't really seem like a fair trade-off for stimulus to me, given the situation that we're in right now. I mean, that's an asset that the people of this province have paid for, right? We've had a lot of economic hardship in recent years with our debt going through the roof, $1 billion in debt servicing charges annually. We're paying more in debt servicing than we've been paying for education. And now that it's almost paid for, the feds are going to come in and take it. There's been like no consultation on this. And like, why are we even talking about hydroelectricity when solar and wind power is going to be cheaper than hydroelectric in 100% of the world in 5 years? And I've never gotten a good answer to that from our leadership.
No, and that's one thing that I mentioned to you when we were in a conversation some time ago. Why is it that a place like Newfoundland and Labrador, we're not looking at wind power? I mean, think about what we can have. Think about where we are out in the middle of the Atlantic, and there's no talk of that. Like, my question, I guess my mind goes back to and goes into the thing, who's benefiting?
Mm-hmm.
Who is it looks in the future and sees the benefit for themselves by not investing in greener energy? What is it?
And they're giving lip service to green energy, right? The green energy plan was put in the mandate letter for the Minister of Industry, but I don't recall hearing anything done on it or any consultations. The only thing they seem to be doing is talking to oil companies about it, right? They've got that oil and gas industry task force, and the energy transition subgroup has oil and gas people on it. So we're being set up for the oil barons to become the green energy barons, clearly, right? It seems like all the advantage in this transition is being given to oil companies. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen. And we need to make sure that green energy jobs are good, high paying jobs, right? There's definitely going to be green energy jobs created. I think the estimates are 100,000 in Canada. And we've got to worry, like, if the US is going to be rebuilding its entire energy grid in the next 15 years, Newfoundland and Labrador needs to worry about losing people to other areas that are moving on green energy. I mean, one of the areas that are going to benefit is the car companies, right? Building electronic vehicles. So are we going to start losing people to places with car plants? I mean, if other jurisdictions are moving on this and we're not, that could be another reason for outmigration. But if we, like, why aren't we looking to the feds for green energy research and development funding right now? Like, what shouldn't they be giving that money to the oil and gas mm-hmm. jurisdictions? Just because we need to transition worse than other provinces, and help us get some kind of leg up on developing products and services in green energy that can service the world and actually, create opportunities that are going to bring money into the province from the outside. Like, mm-hmm. Why is that not part of the plan? Why is the whole plan the Atlantic Loop, which seems to be happening in secret?
Well, there's certainly a lot of things that's happening in secret, and it pops out in front of us, periodically and surprises us, but really, I suppose we're not really surprised with what goes on. Dr. Oates, there's a lot of other things that we'd like to talk about, but we're running out of time. But we're going to have to do this again sometime soon, probably after our election votes are counted, and we can see where we are, who's in power, what's going on, and if we got a minority or majority government, and where we are headed. But I've got one final tough question for you before we go. And the question is this: you're given an opportunity to give some advice to the leaders of our province. What do you say to them?
Oh God, it's not like I've been quiet on that.
No.
Well, I think we need to move off natural resources sectors, right? And focus on service sectors, tech sectors, green energy sectors. because there is something called the resource curse, and resource-rich economies don't do as well as economies that develop service sectors. And the reason for that is the resource royalty revenue always just gets folded into infrastructure projects that run over cost and essentially bankrupt the jurisdiction. So move off natural resources. If I could take the resource curse seriously, if I could give them one piece of advice.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you see, and the discussion I've had over the last while about our natural resources is, it seems like we have given up our rights, we've given up our royalties, and we've just allowed, for a quick fix, we've allowed governments to negotiate away our rights to these resources that we could have benefited from over the years. But and people talk about all the resources that have been in Newfoundland and Labrador, but look where we are today. But I will say this, somebody must have benefited from them.
Oh yeah.
It's not us.
Well, the book I always suggest is Valerie Summers' Regime Change in a Resource Economy. I was her research assistant in the political science department when she was publishing that book. But, one of the things she shows is that there was mining capital that came into the province that just disappeared, right? So, it goes into the Newfoundland Railroad, which goes to mainland contractors. Same thing with Sprung Greenhouse. Same thing with Joey Smallwood's rubber boots and chocolate factories, right? Like that's the infrastructure projects I'm talking about. It just, it always just goes to contractors out of province.
Yeah. So my final word before we go is this, and these conversations I enjoy them so much. My belief is that as a government, and as long as we can make some investment, I believe in investing in community-based businesses and local businesses where people are taking what they make as a profit, reinvest it, grow their family, grow rural Newfoundland, grow Newfoundland and Labrador in general. And I believe that's where we got to go. Besides the green energy and all of that, I believe a lot of the ideas that entrepreneurs have, like you mentioned, Misa in St. John's, a young two brothers that did this and have grown this company. And we actually had them on one of our shows, and they talked about how they treat their staff and how they're like a family, and how they respect the ideas and suggestions of their employees. It was phenomenal to hear that conversation and to see their progress and how they've grown and how people are willing to invest in this sort of company and business.
Yeah, we're stuck in old business models here for sure. We're definitely stuck in old government models.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's been a great conversation. And let's continue it again sometime soon. We want to thank you for joining us, and there's an open invitation to come back. We want to thank everybody that gave us some comments, and those that watched and those who will watch as we put it on our website. And we look forward to next week, same time, Wednesday at 7:30, to get together again on TalkNL and talk everything Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you, Dr. Oates. Good to see you again, Rudy. And we'll talk again real soon.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.